And another foul on board. His third for setting a screen.
Because of physical play, although Jordan Taylor just got caught with a moving screen. Izzo's dying for a moving screen.
It's that dreaded moving screen.
Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Moving Screen Podcast. I'm Brendan Quinn from The Athletic, here with Dylan Burkhart, Hoops. Tuesday, February 2nd. Some basketball in East Lansing, no basketball in Ann Arbor. But Dylan, the big question this morning is, what would be college basketball's equivalent to the Patrick Reed embedded ball controversy?
I don't exactly know what it would be, but I know who it would be.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
I'm going with Brad Davison, pulling some sort of move. That's my Patrick Reed of the Big Ten. Who are you going with? What do you have an equivalent?
Patrick Reed as Brad Davison as the Patrick Reed of the Big Ten. That's strong.
Or an Adam Woodbury throwback. He was one of the all-time Big Ten villains. Eye poking and everything else. Remember when he was stealing the jump balls? That was great. That investigative reporting by the internet to catch him grabbing everyone's arm on the jump balls.
Slow-mo videos of him taking off from the ground early. And then the eye poking was like people breaking those things down like this is a Bruder film. Man, I'm trying to think of the coach or anybody else. No, I think Davidson's it, man. That's pretty spot on right there.
It's hard to cheat the rules of basketball, though, right? Like, what is the move, right?
It is. Would like a Bo Borowski count?
Oh, just cheat, just blatant officiating. All right, that's taking it somewhere else, huh? I mean, like the cheapest moves are like kind of the head throwback. I feel like that's disingenuous. Go back to the Melo Trimble. I think shooters with the leg kick out, like that's been the big thing this year that we've seen Davison do a lot, where he draws fouls and gets flop warnings on jump shots quite a bit. So those are my picks. Where are you going with?
Jordan Poole enjoyed a leg kick.
Yeah.
Big time.
Those are the two ways, like just truly cheating the game, in my opinion. Just poor intentions.
I will say, I mean, Mo Wagner had a little in him of I feel like he would try to get away with as much as he could on the court.
By that?
Try to get under people's skin.
He didn't really ever get away with anything, though. To be fair, I guess
true.
Patrick Reed didn't either. It's hard when everything you're doing is on video, huh?
And I can't imagine Patrick Reed getting many shots that won't be on video probably for the rest of his life in the PGA Tour at this rate. So, well, Dylan, today we are going to get into a little Michigan State deconstruction, let's say. I think everyone knows the numbers at this point, so we probably won't harp too much on what's going wrong with this team, but more so maybe why it was built this way and what went wrong from there. But obviously preview the Iowa game, which is tonight. It is currently, 10:15 in the morning, so like a little window there for some Iowa talk. And then we'll get into Michigan and kind of where it goes from this extended pause that it's on. So start with the Spartans since they're playing tonight.
Yeah,
the line is down to 9.5.
So
I saw Graham tweet that it dropped 2 points, which means money is riding on the Spartans heading into Iowa City tonight. What are your thoughts?
Where would you be putting your money there, sir?
I don't know if I want anything to do with this.
So the first stat that I've been digging around some Michigan State stats here. The first stat I pulled up, Michigan State 2-12 against the spread this year. I think that pretty much just says everything about what was expected from this Michigan State team and what we've seen up to this point, right? Like, it's not just that they're losing; it's that everyone's been expecting them to play better, and they just haven't really got there. So, I thought that was a jarring stat. Not a great week. Obviously, I mean, it's tough. You go 20 days without playing a game, and then I'm not sure it's really a shock that you score 37 points at Rutgers, right? Like, you're going to struggle a bit, but maybe you'd score 50 points at Rutgers. 37, just bottoming out like that was tough to watch. I don't even know where to start with this, as far as it's all the same things we've said, and they just be like the the flashing light is now just a blaring alarm at this point for all the issues that this team has, and it's hard to figure out how to get back on track.
Yeah, I mean, like in terms of this game tonight, you figure at some point they're going to make shots, and Iowa, as you often point out, is often a very good remedy for teams desperate to make shots. That said, Michigan State's offense is so bad right now that even if it does make shots at a higher clip than it has been, that's still not going to be enough to go, race to 85 points with Iowa. That's just not happening, right? Michigan State's offense in conference play ranks last in efficiency, last in 3-point percentage, last in 2-point percentage, is 13th in turnover percentage. I mean, that is shocking at this point. They are 8 games into league play and just can't score the ball. Their last few games, 62 points, 37 points, 54 points. I mean, this is like bad Rutgers back in the day bad in terms of just inability to put the ball into the basketball hoop.
Yeah, my Michigan State offensive stat, Bart Torvik has you can do splits basically based on date ranges. Over the last month, Michigan State's ranked 301st in adjusted offensive efficiency. And they're 100th for the season, but that's how bad they've been. They've been basically 200 spots worse than they are for the season. Pretty much just falling apart on that side of the court. And I think it all comes back to just not having any sort of reliable point guard play and an offense that just there's just so many mid-range shots just in between floaters. Like no one can get to the rim consistently. You don't have anything you can count on that side of the ball. The good thing is though, like you said, it's Iowa defense. If you're ever going to just make a bunch of shots and play out of your mind, this is the get right game on offense, right? I was going to give you a ton of open jump shots. Sometimes maybe that's all you need. I mean, Michigan State has been pretty good against zones this year, I'd say. Iowa will play that whatever zone. I mean, this is a chance for, I think, if Michigan State's offense falls flat tonight, I think that's a scary, scary sight because Iowa doesn't really shut down anyone's offense.
Right. And part of the thing though is like against Iowa, like so much of the free money that you can get is like on actually making open shots, right? Like Michigan State has had open shots, just nobody is making anything, And like a game like this would be a game that you would want Gabe Brown out there for sure, right? And you don't have Gabe Brown, So like who are going to be the guys making open shots is my biggest question at this point. Like, it's not like Michigan State's going to go start scoring at the rim left and right in this game, right? That's not gonna, I don't think so. I mean,
Iowa doesn't guard. I mean, they'll score at the rim more effectively than I think they have in a while. Right. But yeah, you do have to make threes. And the problem is you look at the Big Ten stats, like you go down the list and man, I don't know who's going to make threes. That's like, I don't know what the answer is there. I do think it would be Gabe Brown, but it's got to be Josh Langford, right? I mean, more and more the offense has just sort of come, well, let's let Josh Langford try to score. And it hasn't really happened up to this point, but he's got a hot shooting game in him, right?
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, they have one player on the team shooting over 34% on threes. Or sorry, two. One that's actually playing tonight. That's Foster, who shoots 41%. Nobody else on the team is shooting over 34% for the year. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what else there is to say, but what about the Garza situation?
Well, that's the problem because
that's the problem.
Because Michigan State's post-up defense has just been atrocious this year. And like, I get it. Like, it's good that Michigan State is a good defensive rebounding team. Like, they can still do that. Mm-hmm. But teams have just been killing Michigan State in the post. And that's not what you really want going. Like, you're going to have to try to stop that. And I don't really know how that happens. I want to see more Marcus Bingham. I think he is the best chance to do it maybe with his length, but now you're shaking your head. You're not buying that. No.
I was shaking my head like, what else is there? Like, what do you have to lose at this point? Right. Like, yeah, it makes sense just to kind of sink or swim, right? Just throw him out there and see.
I mean, at least he can block some shots.
Right.
I don't know. I like.
And the game will never slow down for him until he plays like extended minutes. So just play him extended minutes and just see what happens. If anything, any lights turn on.
The post-up defense has been the issue all along, and it's the scary thing for Michigan State is they haven't really played against Iowa or Illinois. I mean, do they play Illinois? It needs to be rescheduled. They haven't played Illinois yet, right?
They've not played Illinois.
So they haven't played Michigan. Those are all the teams that are. I guess they did play Purdue once. They have Purdue again. Those are all the post-up bigs in the league, and Michigan State's in the 11th percentile defensively against post-ups and hasn't played against Kofi or against Garza. I mean, that's just terrifying. Like, it was one thing Minnesota was down there earlier, but they'd already played against all those guys. Teams are going to just keep attacking Michigan State inside until they can figure something out. And I thought it was pretty jarring just watching that Ohio State game, just how easily Ohio State's not big, but Ohio State's tough and physical and does like to play inside, and they just dominated the paint in that game, I thought. And that was just shocking to watch from a Michigan State team that you expect not that at all from.
I mean, for Garza, all you have to do is just give him tape of the second half against Purdue. And, he's going to be – he will sprint to the arena for this game with just utter glee. So, they're going to have to dig and all that stuff and throw whatever they can. I mean, they're going to have to do something. They can't just let their bigs go one-on-one against them. He'll score 45 points. But if they do, you have to then pray, right, that Iowa just has a really poor shooting night and that you can suddenly pull some shots out of your ass.
The good thing is, from Michigan State perspective, CJ Frederick's been out the last game and a half. I'm not sure what his status is.
I think Fran said yesterday that he might try to give it a go, but I don't think it'll be anything close to like full status.
When he's not on the court, it's been a big issue for Iowa because when he's out, they don't have another shooter, right? So it's Bohannon, Frederick, and Wieskamp all around Garza, and you don't really have anyone to double off of. Mm-hmm. Without Frederick, you're basically forcing a non-shooter onto the court, and really a second non-shooter because I don't think anyone really trusts Connor McCaffrey to shoot. But in that point, you have a double team option, and I think that really helps slow this team down because they're either going with another big like Keegan Murray or there's just no Joe Toussaint. There's no one else that can hit shots consistently.
Right.
And that's what makes Iowa so dangerous is when they have the three shooters in Garza, and it's just not quite the same thing if you don't have that same shooting threat. So that gives you a chance, if you're Michigan State, to bring an aggressive double, to really scheme up a plan to slow down Garza at least and make him work. And I think Indiana did a really good job of that, and that's something to at least keep an eye on from a Michigan State perspective.
I also feel like anyone who's watching this game who hasn't really maybe watched Iowa this year is keep an eye on that Keegan Murray. I feel like he's going to be a really good player in the league here for the next couple of years. So it's probably someone to familiarize yourself with. But one thing I wanted to talk about is kind of this roster construction at Michigan State and maybe just kind of try to unpack like how the program got to this level of a 1-year drop off. And I do think it'll be mostly like the guys they have coming in next year. There's going to be an influx of talent. I wouldn't be surprised to see Michigan State tap the portal a little bit this offseason, which we'll talk about now. Before we came on to record, and we were kind of going through this, I thought you brought up an interesting point that they probably should have been more aggressive in the transfer portal this year. Obviously, it's never a guarantee, right? And Michigan's probably more of an outlier in terms of how it hit on its 2 transfers. But, there is talent there. Michigan State has an open scholarship, and they could clearly use something else, right? Whatever it may be. So I would imagine this offseason, that's something that you look to. And then between Max Christie, Pierre Brooks, and why am I blanking on the third?
Jaden Akins.
Thank you, Jaden Akins.
And potentially Boyachi, right? Mm-hmm. The big man from the 2022 class is a potential reclass, right?
Correct. And no, I don't think Amani Bates is reclassing and playing at Michigan State next year. But point being, I do think that this is a blip more than anything in the big picture. But, how did this happen? And kind of when I've been sitting back thinking about it, when you look at what Michigan State normally does, right, it usually has really strong upperclassmen, even guys who might not be NBA players, whatever, but they've been in the program for 3 or 4 years. They're proven, they're blah, blah, blah. And, this year, when you look back at like the 17 and 18 recruiting classes, that's kind of where, for me, big picture, kind of all roads go to in terms of what has happened or what's gone wrong this year. And, in 17 was an amazing class. You had Jaren Jackson and Xavier Tillman. Problem is it was too good. You don't have either of them left. And then that the 18 class, which is Marcus Bingham, Foster Loyer, Gabe Brown, Thomas Kithier, Aaron Henry, just hasn't quite come to fruition. What are your general thoughts here?
Yeah, the first thing that jumps out to me is, you look at this Michigan State issue, roster, the biggest issue is at point guard, right? And I think when you have an established player, like Cassius Winston started as a freshman, right? So that was 2016, 17, right? His freshman year. From that point on, basically you knew Cassius Winston was Michigan State's starting point guard for the next 4 years. And it's really hard to, especially at point guard, it's really hard to recruit another point guard who's good enough to play, but is willing to come in and be a backup for 1 or 2 years, right? So at that point, you're almost promising yourself that you're going to have to find a freshman starter point guard by the time Winston graduates, right? So that's the first thing I look at and Michigan had the same problem, right, with Xavier Simpson, right? It was pretty clear for years that he was going to be the guy. No one's going to sign to play point guard at Michigan, really, because they're going to be blocked. It's a tough recruiting situation. So,
and then Julius ends up transferring out once Xavier Simpson graduates, but that's another story.
Yeah, well, either way, though, I think it is when you want to build around seniors, and if you have seniors that it's just this weird situation where there's so many rosters that are one and done and people are looking for the best opportunity to play, it's hard to sell kids on, we'll come and learn from Cassius Winston for 2 years, and then it'll be your team as a junior. That's not what people are looking for right now. So Michigan State clearly didn't find a point guard to fill that gap. And obviously Foster Loyer could have been that guy. But again, sometimes if you're recruiting guys who are comfortable with that, it maybe means they're not really ready to be the guy afterward, right? Rocket Watts, just not a point guard. And that's really what it comes down to at this point, is that he hasn't been able to take the leap. Because I think he's the guy that we would have said before the year, okay, if Rocket Watts is good enough to be an all, there's potential like all Big Ten second team player, right? Like that was in the conversation for him, and it just hasn't been. So I guess my question to you would be, if you look at this roster and what's happened, and you try to think about maybe what you think Michigan State was thinking in the offseason, where do you think this team has fallen short? Like, do you think it was Michigan State worried it didn't have a point guard headed into this season? Did Michigan? Oh yeah. Like, should they have done more to address that?
I think undoubtedly. I think that would be the first thing that you would point to of, they needed to be more aggressive. They looked at the Akins kid from Harvard. Obviously didn't get him, but I didn't quite see kind of a sense of urgency in the portal. Like, we got to get something. And now, if I remember correctly, like, did the main situation kind of dragged?
It went on like most of the summer, I would say.
It went on for a while. And I think they did feel like, they put in the work in that recruitment and that they should have a scholarship available, if it came to it. So maybe that tied their hands a little bit, but I don't know. If you're Michigan State, I feel like you're an attractive enough place that you could get a point guard somewhere. And also maybe people saw Rocket Watts and said, well, he's going to be your starting point guard. I'm not going there. Right. If you didn't watch Michigan State every game last year and know that Rocket Watts was not a point guard.
Even if you did, though,
true.
He looked at the roster and he had to play point guard.
Right. You're not wrong. So Yeah, I mean, I think that they just kind of misread who was going to be able to take what steps forward. And like that 18 class, really, just no one has really particularly taken a step forward. Obviously Aaron Henry has had a really solid college career, right? And played a ton and all that. I mean, he was the fourth rated guy in that class. Marcus Bingham was supposed to be a pretty big deal. People were talking about him as one and done, which is just crazy in hindsight. Meanwhile, Izzo wanted to redshirt him. And lawyer is lawyer. Gabe Brown is a guy who was ranked 101st in the country that I certainly thought was going to be really good. That hasn't quite come around. And, Thomas Kithier was still ranked 161st. And he's just kind of been a piece, right? I feel like you would have 3 years ago, if you would have said that this class kind of plateaued where it has, I don't know. I'm trying to remember back, like what level of surprise would you have?
I think you look at Aaron Henry as the big surprise, right? He was a guy who's been starting. I mean, he's the guy that has been a 3-year contributor, starter, who you would expect to need to take that jump for this team, right? And you look down the roster, the rest of those guys you listed, they're sort of all 4th through 8th rotation Big Ten players, right? Like, I don't think there's anyone you really say, oh, they can be a star.
I thought Gabe Brown could be a legit starter at Michigan State by his junior year.
But how many times did he show that in his freshman or sophomore year? Like, it's not exactly a surprise that he's not at this point, right? So
no, I mean in the recruitment is what I'm talking about when these guys were coming in.
Yeah, so it's just you look down the roster and how do you get out of this situation also, right? Like none of these guys are seniors. Well, Langford obviously is, but either way, if you look at moving forward, how you're going to have a new class coming in, but I don't think there's really any easy answers. Like, I still think you might need to be more aggressive in the transfer portal.
Agree.
This summer to try to round out some of the holes in the roster, right? Like
a shooter. You need to bring in a upperclassman shooter for sure.
And Christie can shoot, but you also need a point guard, right? Is Jaden Akins the starting point guard for this team next year? Are you trusting that based on how this season went, or do you try to go out and get another guy to give you a little depth in that spot, right? Like, that's what I look at as the big question, because is Rocket Watts, I mean, I don't know. Like, it's just hard to figure out. It's one thing to talk about how you get here, but I think it's more interesting to say how you get out of it. And it will be a really interesting season, because when you have a season like this, I also don't necessarily expect that everyone will be back either, right?
No, I would be surprised. I think there's going to be a couple guys who have to think things through a little bit. So, yeah, I mean, all right. Well, how to get out of it? I mean, you got your guys who are coming in. I think there's plenty of nice pieces there to build around. Is Aaron Henry back? I mean, he wanted to go last year. He has not done anything this year to improve his stock. But my question is, does he want to play a 4th year of college basketball? Right. Those are two different conversations. Should he versus will he is not a, singular thing. So, but you have a senior Joey Hauser, Rocket Watts. Like, I feel like this is a back to the drawing board summer where he needs to figure out what he is as a basketball player. Junior year, Malik Hall, I like. But yeah, you're going to have to go probably get an upperclassman point guard, preferably one who can shoot.
Yeah, I think if you just I think that would be my stopgap, because that's going to help you integrate the freshmen so much more effectively. That's going to just kind of help everything work. If you can get some sort of secondary playmaker, point guard, run the team, that would fill in a lot of gaps, and it would make you a lot more confident that you can get something out of Max Christie. Like, right. Not something, but he can have a really good season instead of being asked to do too much, maybe. Like, let him play a natural role, right? So I like that. as far as filling the gaps. It's going to, like Joey Hauser, good player, but he also pretty clearly needs good point guard play, I think, to be at his best offensively. And I think he would have looked like a completely different player if he was eligible last year and was able to play off of a great point guard, because to be a great pick and pop big like he is, like you need the ball handling threat to create all those looks, and Michigan State just doesn't have that right now. So I think a lot of those guys could look completely different if they're in different roles, but I also don't know if you can go into next year and say that we're just going to kind of wing it without a proven point guard again, right?
No, which means, to your other point, something has to give in terms of this roster. Because right now they're one over without Boyke. Did I pronounce that correctly?
I think it's Boyache. I don't know.
Boyache. All right. Without him reclassing, they're one over. With him reclassing, they're two over.
Okay.
So, and I mean, of course, you need room for Amani Bates. That was sarcasm. So okay, where are these spaces opening up? Because not only do you need to get room for one more, you probably need room for two more. And in a perfect scenario, you and I are saying they need room for a third guy if they want to bring someone in. So it's not easy. It's not a matter of just walking out there and picking up whoever's best available. There's a lot of bodies on this roster.
Yeah. Do you think big picture, like we talk so much, I feel like the more traditional Big Ten coaches who have been doing this for a while really believe in sort of like roster continuity and program building. Like, when was the last time Michigan State had to transfer out? It's been a while, right? Like
a long time. Yeah. I think it was the kid.
4 or 5 years, right?
Marvin Clark. Is that
Marvin Clark? Yeah. At St. John's, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Do you think in the way college basketball is set up right now, it's much more prudent to be maybe more aggressive in sort of addressing roster gaps and being more aggressive in the portal and with recruiting, just everything, rather than kind of waiting on guys that you develop to come around? Or do you still think that it's the best way is to build kind of brick by brick?
I think it's a hybrid model. I think it's the Villanova model is the model, right? Like you do want upperclassmen, but then you still, Villanova is still going to be getting kids who are two and done, right? They get that high level talent, and then they fill in the gaps as needed. Like a couple of years ago, they brought in like a kid from like Albany or something like that, right? And it was just like an older body, and I might have that school wrong. I forget. It was a grad transfer. And they just needed like an older body, right? A guy who could you could put the ball in his hands and he'll get it from A to B, and kind of just a person like that. I think you always want to have guys develop within your program, and be experienced dudes as juniors and seniors who, when you play big games, like are not overwhelmed by the moment because they've, been college basketball players. Like there's something to be said for that. And age does win in college basketball. But you can create age in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just like Michigan State are two of the teams that are really recruiting at the highest level in the Big Ten, right? Which just brings on a lot of extra risk, I would say, as far as falling flat in your face. Like you just look at Duke, Kentucky this year, right? If you recruit, it's easy to miss an eval even with a one and done kid. And if your entire season is resting on someone being able to be an immediate contributor, I think you need to be a lot more prudent in maybe filling roles via the transfer portal. And I think Michigan did a really good job this year doing that with Mike Smith and Sean D. Brown. But next year, I think Michigan sets up in a situation where you could look and they could have some huge roster holes that all of a sudden it might be harder to address when you have, like Michigan's advantage this year was there was clear roles that weren't spoken for, right? And it was really easy to handle. At Michigan State, you have Rocket Watts, who is going to be the point guard. So if you're a Bryce Aiken or a Mike Smith, you're not really going to want to go to Michigan State because it's clear that there's this guy that played 30 minutes a game. If you're trying to constantly fill those gaps while also recruiting to those gaps, it becomes tricky. But finding that balance, I think, is just really key. And you know so much more about a player when they've played a little college basketball as far as how they could fit in your system. So I do think if you're smart about it, the portal is really going to become a smarter and smarter way to ease some of that transition, so to speak, between talented classes, right?
Yeah. The like the amount of just things that are probably just taken for granted that has gone well for Michigan really speaks to all of that. Like, right, Mike Smith being so good allows Eli Brooks to just be Eli Brooks. And Eli Brooks is just 32 minutes a game. You know exactly what you're getting out of him. And like, that's something that like Michigan State would just die for at this point, right? It's just like a veteran guy who you know what you're getting in every game.
Basically, every player on Michigan State's roster is not in their ideal role.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're all having to try to do something beyond what they would be comfortable with.
Yeah.
That's sort of the exact issue, right? Aaron Henry needs to pretend to be a point guard. Rocket Watts needs to pretend to be a point guard. Joey Hauser can't just catch and shoot. He needs to try to make plays and do all that. Joshua Langford is all of a sudden a go-to scorer instead of a spot-up shooter in the wing, right? If you could just shift all of those pieces in another direction, everyone would be more efficient, everyone would be more comfortable, and they just don't have that. And I think it all comes back to that point guard play.
Yeah. One thing that's interesting, 2018 I think if you go year by year, 2018 is maybe one of the least performing recruiting classes to come from the state of Michigan in recent memory. And it's just probably not a coincidence that Michigan State had 4 of the top 10 players from the state that year.
Who were do you have the top 10 in front of you? Yeah,
the top 10 were Bingham, and he was at 66 in the country. Bingham, Brandon Johns, Foster Lawyer, Gabe Brown, David DeJulius, Travion Williams, Thomas Kithier, Taylor Curry, Bryce Washington, and Lamar Norman.
Yikes.
A very underwhelming class from the state of Michigan, and Michigan State leaned into it, right? And now that's, 3 years later, that's a third of their roster.
Yeah, have we seen Michigan State start to shift to maybe more recruiting outside of Michigan over the last few years? Because, I know that's a big focus, but I also think as the talent dwindles and recruiting is becoming more national, even with prep schools and everything else. So I wonder if that plays a part as well too, because some of Michigan State's big hits recently haven't just been in state, going out to Chicago and getting Max Christie. Those are, but I guess you still have Brooks and Akins, but I just feel you can't control how good the talent is in the state in every year. Right. So I do think they're starting to expand that a little bit, at least. I
mean, they did last year, right? Sissoko and Hogarth.
Exactly.
But that's the thing is Michigan State's always going to want to get the best kids out of Michigan. That's just part of the brand, right? But just because that's your brand doesn't mean that every year is going to warrant having, multiple players who are in state. Obviously this 2021 group, right? Brooks and Aiken, hell yeah, right? Go get those dudes. And Bufkin's a guy who's worthy of a scholarship at Michigan State.
But 19, there was only one kid who was really a high major in the state, right? If I'm looking at these rankings, right? It was Romeo Weems, and he ended up at DePaul, and then there was no one else. So maybe that's part of also why you haven't seen Michigan State maybe reload for this current roster, because the state was down again. Am I missing someone, or I don't think so?
19 out of the state of Michigan.
I don't
well, Rocket technically, no.
Oh yeah, he's probably switched to Ohio on this list, but yeah, so,
right.
So there's Rocket, and Rocket has been sort of the up and down of what.
Right, but Rocket was clearly, was high major recruit. And, yeah. Which a lot of these guys were. I get. I mean, I don't really remember. Brandon Johns got serious looks. Marcus Bingham's recruitment, I have zero recollection of. Do you at all?
I think it was pretty much it was early. It was kind of done and dusted early. I feel like to Michigan State. I don't think it ever I feel like he committed fairly early, but You're dating me now. This is too long, man. Everything blurs together. 3 years ago, can't remember that.
Okay. You want to talk some Michigan?
Yeah, let's get into it. Michigan is last played on Friday, January 22nd, and is next scheduled to play on February 11th. What do you see? Like, I feel like, what do you make of, I guess you've just been following Michigan State and their layoff. How do you think this affects Michigan, and what do you think it does for, I guess, the Big Ten race in general?
I'm not that over. First of all, Michigan needs to get a game before the 11th. The Big Ten has to give them a game that Monday or something.
They can't practice until
I wouldn't
Sunday
be
at the earliest, right?
I do wonder if the numbers are a certain way in the program, if they can figure out a way to try to get at least some practice, if the state and county would allow it. Who knows? Maybe that's wishful thinking.
I mean, at this point, what we know is February 7th, come back, right? And can start practicing. So if you can't practice until February 7th, I don't think you want to play a game on Monday.
Well, I
think you'd probably rather have 3 days of practice to get your wind and everything rather than trying to add a game.
I was just thinking you want to get a game in before playing Illinois. Was my line of thinking, but that's a fair point.
I think you definitely need practice. And so unless something changes, but it would have to change quick because it's already Tuesday, right? I mean, I can't really see that happening. I think you'd feel pretty screwed if they were like, okay, well, you're back to play. You have to play a game after 1 day of practice, right? That can't be.
But what if it was like Nebraska?
Well, they're not going to add a game that they didn't have scheduled just so they could get an easy win. I don't think you want that at all. I honestly think it probably helps Michigan to have your first game back be against Illinois. You're not going to have some sort of weird fog of getting back up to it. You're going to be ready to go.
It's fair. So I think big picture, though, I'm not that overly worried about the break having an effect on Michigan like it has maybe on some teams. I like experienced really good teams find a way to come back and play. Look at Villanova. I feel like Villanova is the comp here. It's a team that has its system, that knows what it's doing, really well coached, older guys, right? Know what they're doing. That's how I look at Michigan. So do they come out and maybe lose back-to-back Illinois, Wisconsin, but like play okay? That's certainly plausible, but they could have lost those games regardless, right? I just don't think you're going to see this like team come wandering onto the floor looking like it's never played basketball before and like be totally disjointed, right? Throwing up bricks all over the place. I don't really see that. What about you?
The problem is, for me with that argument is Michigan have been playing so well for 2 or 3 weeks where they're obviously not going to be able to just come back to that level. And they had pretty clearly built to that over time. Like they were playing better basically each time they took the court. I mean, if they come back and they're playing like, sure, Michigan, but like Michigan in early December, that's a completely different team. And that plays a factor, I think.
Michigan in November and December, though, we're also still really figuring out roles and all that stuff. Like when you're coming back in this instance, you at least know what it looks like. They didn't even know what it looked like early in the year. They were still figuring out how to use Hunter Dickinson, right? Like there was a lot. Yeah, Mike Smith was playing his first games at this level at that time. Rotation wise was still kind of all over the place. Austin Davis was starting. Hell, he might start when they come back for all we know. But there was a lot more unsettled then. I feel like Michigan has something to try to recapture when it comes back.
Yeah, that's fair, and I agree with that. But I think it will take some time. Like you're talking about 2 weeks with not shooting, not practicing. That's a big gap, I think, in time, right? Like,
oh, no doubt. Like I'm not
even touch a ball, really.
I'm not saying this is uncomplicated, but I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying I don't see it being this total train wreck of like, can they recapture what they had and blah blah blah. I think they are what they are. They're a really good team. Again, what do you think of the Villanova comparison? I mean, they've come back, they beat Seton Hall, Providence, Seton Hall. And just kind of keep rolling along.
I mean, that's a that's a best. Like I don't know how you can really predict. If Michigan could play Seton Hall twice in Providence, they'd probably start off pretty well too. I mean, like that. I think there's a bigger gap between Villanova and everyone else in the Big East than there is between Michigan and the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think Michigan's bigger problem is that it's playing Illinois, Wisconsin back to back to start, more so than like that it's just has a break, you know?
Yeah, at the same time, like, and that'll really set. It's going to be really interesting what happens with this Big Ten race in general, because if you're really if they really try to squeeze in whatever the 4 Michigan games that were postponed in this time frame, it's going to be messy. To say the least, right? There's not a lot of time to fit those games in. And there could be, like, if you're Michigan, you don't want to play 20 games at the expense of running out of steam at the end of the season, right? Like that's a really tough situation all around, in my opinion. Like, obviously you can do easy things like Michigan and Michigan State play back to back the last weekend of the season. Like, that's a no brainer for me. You have to just do that. But what are you doing to get those other games in when there's not really a lot of gaps? Are you really going to play? I think it'd be like 11 games in 28 days or something. That's a lot. And I wonder what this will look like for a team like Michigan. What do they really have to gain by getting a bunch of extra games jammed into the schedule? Are you like, and we don't know how the Big Ten is going to be decided. So that's really interesting to me, is how this plays out, assuming everything gets back up and running, and just what the league does in that situation.
Right. The idea of just shoehorning in these 4 games, I think, is definitely a big talking point internally right now, and a very real concern of what the league is going to do. And the league, I've put in more requests than I can speak to at this point. Like, I don't think anyone knows what the hell they're doing. And I'm not saying that like it's a criticism. I'm saying that as like, these are really hard decisions to make. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what the right answers are in a lot of these things. Because the idea of having imbalanced schedules at the end of the regular season, what do you do with that? What is your champion in that scenario, right? And between that and trying to figure out what the hell to do with the Big Ten tournament, like, there are no easy answers here. And, I have a level of like, I feel bad for the people trying to decide this, because it's not easy stuff.
Well, something should have been written down before the season started. And
yeah, but at the same time, right? I mean, they learned their lesson from football, right? They painted themselves in a corner and had to get out of it, and came out of it looking like idiots.
The tricky part is, do you start making schedule decisions based on what the league standings look like? If Michigan goes and beats Illinois and Wisconsin and is 3 games ahead or whatever in the race, all of a sudden do you say, like, that's just the hard part, right? Do you still make them get all those games in? Because obviously, like, it's on balance, but if there are multiple games ahead, I don't know. It's just a tricky spot all around, where if you're Iowa, you're like, they better play every damn game because we want to be in the picture. But I don't know. There's no easy answer. I feel like it's just crazy to me that nothing has been put out publicly or stated. And obviously, like, I mean, the Big Ten regular season champion matters, but it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't decide who goes to anything, right? So It's not like a huge deal like it was in the football season, where you were actually deciding who goes to the championship game. So this is a little different in that case.
The much bigger decision is the Big Ten tournament, in my estimation. Like, they need to make a call on that. On what they're doing, and if they're moving it, right? There was a column in the Indy Star this week, making the case to move it to Indianapolis, and it does make sense. But shit, that's not something you throw together in a week. Like,
so
I think by the end of the month, I was told by the end of the month, every conference in America has to tell the selection committee how it's awarding its automatic bid. Obviously, that's not as big for
by the end of February, or
I think by the end of February.
Okay.
I could be wrong on that. I'm pretty sure that's right. But like, there are teams in this league that do not want to play a Big Ten tournament, for sure.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. The ACC came out and said it's playing its full 15-game tournament, I believe, or 15-team tournament.
Well, and okay, like we still don't even have can a team opt out? Is like a major question. What happens if a team wants to opt out?
Well, the whole tournament goes to shit. So that's
right.
You can't play a legit tournament without a team.
If
right?
I'm Michigan and I have and they're still in the situation that they are now, that they have not had a positive COVID test since the summer, and most of the roster hasn't had COVID.
That's the issue.
There is zero chance I'm bringing that team to a conference tournament.
I would take them to Indianapolis, lock them in a hotel room for the week before the season, and say, "This is it." Like
I would take three buses down to Indianapolis and put them in a bubble. Is what Michigan would be probably wants to do and would be wise to do.
Yeah, and especially with you need 7 negative tests the 7 days before. I mean, you're just introducing so much risk to play in these conference tournaments. It seems crazy to me. And I know there's I don't know. I don't see how anyone would want to play in them if you're already going to be in the NCAA tournament. It just makes no sense to me.
No, I mean, but people are going to try to rationalize things, and all of us are going to be sitting there with our arms out being like, no, it's not the right decision. If you're doing it, it's clearly only for TV and for money. It's the only reason to play.
It's the only
these
reason.
Tournaments. Now,
everything's happening.
Let's make the point, right? That's why everything in the NCAA happens. So there's that. But man, If the league has to deal with some teams opting out, I don't know how that goes. Heck, that's going to be real. You think people got worked up about Nebraska throwing shade during the football season and trying to go on its own? This would be, other than it not being football, this would be a bigger story in my mind.
I mean, it's a free bid, though. Like, what if the top 6 teams all opt out? Then you basically guaranteed one of your bubble teams gets in that wouldn't have made it otherwise. If you're the Big Ten.
You're just going out to steal a bid.
And then we are going to put all
the
pomp and circumstance around a Big Ten championship game on Sunday before Selection Sunday. That's Maryland against Indiana. And everyone's like, wait, what's this?
Congratulations. Indiana just got the 11th seed. Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I love conference tournaments. It's like part of what makes March Madness so great. But man,
like you can't go this, like they've gone this far, right? Where there's basically no turning back. Like you got to get to play the tournament, right? So for the fact that you've gone this far with it and are now going to just introduce this element of nothing more than risk is just crazy.
So from your perspective, how do these decisions get made at the conference level? Like, can a coach just what is it, athletic director? What if a coach is like, we're not playing? Like, how do you think that plays out?
I mean, the league obviously hears from the coaches. They're just constant barking up the shelf, and ADs voicing their opinions. But at the end of the day, this is on Kevin Warren. Associate Commissioner Rick Boyages is the associate commissioner, and he oversees basketball. I think they'll do what the majority wants, I think. But, this isn't 14 ADs go sit into a room and decide what they're going to do.
It's just the Big Ten makes the call.
It's the Big Ten. Yeah. I mean, they hear from everybody and then have to make a decision on it.
But the unfair part is if you cancel the Big Ten tournament, like a team like Michigan State, that's their lifeline at a certain point. A team like Maryland could play, like all these teams that could play their way in. And I don't know, it's just, and at the same point, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio State, Iowa, Wisconsin, they have no need to be risking their health when all that matters is the NCAA tournament. So I don't know what to do. And it's just going to happen, I feel like, on the fly. Like someone's going to opt out of a conference tournament, and then what? It's just going to be all chaos at that point.
There is no chance Gonzaga is playing in the WCC tournament.
And
no chance.
And if you're it's it's just crazy because then the WCC is obviously going to say, well, we're going to give our auto bid to
of course,
the conference tournament champions. Like how this just, it creates a whole element of unfairness to the selection process that we've never really dealt with, I would say. Because you never even thought of a team opting out of this, right? Like, I don't know. It's crazy.
It's not something that would ever cross anyone's mind. Now, you know, the good thing with what gets real interesting is so Gonzaga opts out of the WCC. Okay, if BYU goes and wins it, then who cares, right? BYU's probably on the inside of the bubble anyway. But if Pepperdine goes and wins the WCC, now, you know, you're stealing bids and all this stuff and all these leagues. It's in their best interest to get as many bids as possible. So if I'm a commissioner, I'm creating whatever scenario gets my league an extra bid, as shitty as that is. And, you know, some at large or some team that is deserving of probably getting a bid on the bubble goes home and their season's over because there's not going to be an NIT.
Yeah, look at the Valley. What if Drake and Loyola opt out?
Mm-hmm.
And then some team that's basically a 500 Missouri Valley team is going to go to the NCAA tournament. And it's just like with a flip of a switch, right? So
right.
they're going to have to do something. There's going to have to be like a rule, like if the regular season champion opts out, then you can't send an auto bid or something. Like that would make sense from a fairness perspective, in my opinion.
Right.
So then the conference has to either get their best team to play or they get the auto bid. Like that would seem to even some of that out. Because otherwise it's going to be all sorts of foolishness.
Well, I think that
it already is.
Saying.
Okay, that's fair.
One note on the Michigan coming back from this delay. I think the fact, this is just totally going back into a previous conversation, but it was just a thought that crossed my mind. The fact that Michigan, I think, really has rounded into being a high-level defensive team really serves in its favor there. And I would use the example of 18. They win the Big Ten tournament, right? That was the year that the tournament was a week before the NCAA. Mm-hmm. And they didn't play for like 12 days or something like that, I think. Mm-hmm. And that team came back and looked like absolute dog shit in its first game against Montana. Remember that? It was like 9:30. Where were we? Wichita?
The clock broke. Remember, like the shot clock?
Oh my!
It was like a 30-minute delay.
And it was like 62 degrees in the arena. There was nobody there. Nobody cared. No one could hit a shot. But Michigan's defense just, right? That team just strangled other teams. And so you got away with it. And even it was kind of the same thing against Houston. They didn't play that well that game, but the defense kept them in it. So, you know, the fact that this isn't just a like top 10 offensive efficiency that's ranked like 80th in the country in defense, you know what I mean? Does give them a chance, I think, to come back, and they're not just relying on seeing the ball go in the hoop. They can win in a number of different ways.
But that team practiced. Like,
yes,
there's
fair.
A big difference between not practicing for 2 weeks.
I agree.
So I think you just have to point that out at least, because that's a layoff, and they played like dog shit, as you said. And they were in practice, in the gym, getting shots up, everything else. I mean, all we know is Hunter Dickens has been ice fishing. That's about all we got to go off of for this break. A lot of Madden and ice fishing. It's like summer vacation. Like, you're going to just come back and be sharp. I don't know. It's just a weird situation all around. You can't really predict. I know I'm sure people have written stories about this that look at the numbers of shutdowns and everything else. But I also think it's hard because every shutdown's different, right? Michigan State was shut down, but they were having like small group workouts, things like that. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to tell how to compare them, because I'm sure other shutdowns teams have been on pause and haven't been able to practice at all. So it's just, how do you make sense of it? But that's the hand that everyone's been dealt. For Michigan, I think the biggest concern is that, like, Michigan State shut down. By the time they're done with shutdown, they have herd immunity. Michigan hasn't had any positive tests. All these guys are still completely exposed to COVID, and you have a very real chance to have another pause at some point because you haven't had any positive tests. That's the scary part, and that's really the unfair part of it from Michigan's perspective, is they've done everything that was asked of them, they've actually avoided COVID probably as well as any team in the country at this point.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the risk that hangs over them for the next month and a half. And it's really the one thing that can throw the season completely to shit.
Speaking of, what was your take on that Juwan Howard statement yesterday?
Always be recruiting.
I don't know if my favorite part was the lack of firmness one way or the other. I feel like a lot of people just kind of read that as he's backing the coaches, coaches and parents, or basically anyone who's wants high school ball to be played. He did and he didn't. He didn't really say like let them play or anything like that. And it was kind of, but I also want safety, but it's also unfair, but it's this. There's random words are in Mays. Like, why was the word cannot in Mays in that statement?
People are paid the big bucks to write incredibly ambiguous statements and color them in Mays, Brendan.
Totally non-committal statement that no one, I don't think, really asked for. I'm sure that the coach, everyone's been asking, right? That every coach in that office, from Juwan to Martelli to Sadi, Jay Smith, like every single person in there their phones has been blowing up with Michigan basketball people saying, please support return to play. I get that. But like, I think if Juwan Howard said nothing, no one would really notice.
I just think you're always trying to, that's basically the job, right? Is you need to keep coaches happy. So you say you put out a statement, and by the time your statement comes out of the statement factory, it's been dumbed down enough to where you're not even sure what it says. I think that's someone doing their job on the tee, if you ask me.
Let's pick some random words, put them in Maze, really throw everyone off. I didn't know if we were supposed to decode that thing or
well, it's also just awkward to a situation where we're talking about high school playing when his team's not playing despite not having any COVID tests, which hasn't been addressed. Like, that's the only statement we've got from Juwan in the last week and a half, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So
and you've got, there's the marching on for let them play, while Michigan State's roster over the last 2 weeks has just been ravaged with COVID cases, and they're testing every single day, and the high schools can't test every day, and yet a lot of people want them to play. I don't know. As I've told many parents in my DMs, I am a sports writer, not a public health official, and I have no idea if what Michigan is doing is right or if what the other states are doing is right. I have an opinion that playing indoor sports in COVID without testing is probably not the best idea, but I get it. I really do feel bad that I was talking to a high school coach 2 weeks ago who was just kind of telling me about keeping his roster together and these guys, and it was awful, man. It sucks. So
it's an interesting part of like guys doing anything to get games, right? And the uncertainty, like we're seeing all these, like if you just look at Michigan's incoming class, like some guys are playing with club teams, some guys aren't playing, some guys, it's just like prep schools are playing national schedules still. It's all over the map as far as what you're getting. And I think it's going to
prep rocking and rolling. No problem.
Ipsy prep. IMG's playing all over the place.
Like it's crazy. Like I think Amani should have stayed at Lincoln, but he wouldn't be playing if he.
I tell you, he wouldn't have been at Lincoln if. You could have left mid-season or mid-semester or whatever else.
Yeah, they would have been on the first flight to Montverde or one of these places if they hadn't created their own school. But
crazy times. It's going to create a huge problem, I think, evaluating the next 2 or 3 recruiting classes. I think you're going to see just disaster. Like some coaches will really be on top of it and do really well, and then I think you're going to see some big swings and misses with guys because these guys haven't been seen in person for 2 years. And like, so you're thinking about the next 2 classes. That's when these kids were freshmen and sophomores, like huge blind spot. And it's going to be fascinating how that all unpacks. I did see a story that they're talking about potentially coming out of the dead period, depending on how things go in to spring to summer, with like a quiet period and then potentially having some July. I'm sure all the coaches have liked not having to be in AAU gyms all summer, but I think it'd be good to get to that back on track. I think to have some sort of evaluation period if we can get to that point as a country where it's safe to do, because it's going to be tricky.
Yeah. All right. You got anything else?
No, I think that's a wrap.
All right. Well, everyone out there, if you what?
No, go ahead. No.
I didn't know if you had some brilliance on the way out the door.
I'm done.
If you enjoyed this podcast, be so kind to leave us a review in the iTunes store. Share it with your friends. Subscribe to The Athletic. Subscribe to UM Hoops. Tip your bartenders and servers.